My name is Lucas Swart. I'm a white Afrikaner from South Africa. This is part two. It is about the no man's lands as well as the Afrikaners' involvement of keeping the Zulu kingdom a kingdom. Between 1830 and 1850, more than 15,000 farmers moved away from the Eastern Cape or from the Cape Colony. For the British, it was a problem. It had a huge impact on the economy. But the British lost the third war against the Xhosas, and the Boers, the farmers, the Afrikaners, decided that the British government cannot protect them against the onslaught from the Xhosas. So they moved out in an easterly direction, in the direction of Natal, of Zululand. Zululand was established as a kingdom by King Shaka. But Shaka was eventually murdered by his half-brother Dingaan. And Dingaan also murdered all his other half-brothers. But one of his half-brothers had children, and one of the chiefs decided that the lineage of the king must continue, and he warned the half-brother Mpande, who then fled across the Tugela River into safety in the no man's lands area. The farmer did not know about this arrangement, but Napier, the governor of the Cape, had a problem. After he lost the third war, he had a financial problem, and he didn't have the finance or the manpower to stop the farmer from moving away. So he sent a message to George Francis Gardner, a captain who was the British representative with King Dingaan. And he told Gardner to give Dingaan a message from the Queen, telling Dingaan the Queen has a problem, her citizens are dissident and moved away, and what would Dingaan do if his citizens does the same thing? And Dingaan said he will kill him, and she said, do what you think is good. So the farmers did not know about the Boers, they did not know about this arrangement. And when they arrived in Zululand, they went straight to the king, because they knew about the king, and they negotiated a treaty. And Dingaan said, the Basutos stole a lot of his cattle. If the Boers can retrieve the cattle, he will negotiate, which the Boers did. And when they came back, they negotiated. After they signed the treaty, Dingaan then grabbed them, beat them half to death, then threw them over a cliff to their death. Another expedition came, found the bodies as well as the treaty, and that led to the next war with the Zulus, the Boers and the Zulus, at the place called Blood River, which the Boers won. The Zulus fled, the Boers proceeded, and then Mpande, the half-brother with children, he joined up with the Boers, chasing down Dingaan, and he eventually killed Dingaan. So the Boers then, by Andries Pretorius, one of the leaders, reinstated the half-brother Mpande as king of the Zulus. Mpande was a soft-spoken, soft-hearted kind of person, and he decided that he don't want to be king. So he introduced his son, Cetshwayo, as the new king. So the father, the king, gave the prince the kingship. So Cetshwayo had a good relationship with the Boers, but the British wanted to colonize the whole of Natal and Zululand. Actually, the Natal was part of the Zululand. But something also happened. 1838 was the war at Blood River. 1866, the Boers decided to build a monument at Blood River for the people to commemorate the fight. When they arrived with the president of Transvaal and the president of the Free State and other leaders and a lot of supporters at Blood River, They were surprised to see that a lot of Zulus were waiting for them. And they thought this is going to be another war. But it was Cetshwayo, with all the old King Cetshwayo, with all his chiefs and his army, welcoming the Boers. And the Boer leaders all had speeches as well as Cetshwayo. And after Cetshwayo spoke, they agreed for the Boers and the Zulus never to have a war again. And they stack a pile of stones as a remembrance of this agreement never to have a war again. And remember, that was 1866. 1876, the Boers moved into Natal in the area where they thought they could move in to get the passage to the sea, and Cetshwayo didn't agree. So they were a deadlock at that stage. And the British colonel or something came to solve this problem, but they could not. But due to the agreement of 1866, the Boers pulled out of Natal, out of Zululand, leaving Cetshwayo. This is one of the things the politicians will never share. The House of the Kings of Zululand remember this agreement. And the Boer leaders, the real Boer leaders, also remember this agreement of 1866, never to have a war again. And the press does not acknowledge it. The politicians does not acknowledge it. And the problem we globally have with politicians, each politician, when it comes to power, they change the history in the history books for the children to learn a different narrative which will fit their political aspirations. And continuously, Cetshwayo negotiated, but the British were stubborn, and they continued. By 1868, Cetshwayo's son was born, Dinizulu, and 10 years later, 11 years later, in 1878, the British first lost the war against the Zulus, and then they tried again, and they came with a hell of a force, and they attacked Ulundi. But before they attacked Ulundi, the Boers heard about the plan. So 3 Boers from Utrecht, that small town, went into Ulundi, and they took Dinizulu to safety. Cetshwayo lost the war against the British. They captured him. They took him to Cape Town in exile. A few years later, he negotiated to see the Queen. He went to England. He had to wait 10 days. In that 10 days, the British press had a lot of interviews with Cetshwayo, and they were extremely impressed with his stature. Calm, collective, gracefully, and soft-spoken, and he made a very good impression. So the British press actually had an influence on the Queen's decision when she met him eventually. And the Queen decided to send him back so that he can rebuild his kingdom. But in the meantime, in South Africa, and that is what the British did, they will negotiate with you and they will tell you one thing, but they will stab you in the back. And that's exactly what happened with Cetshwayo. Usibepo of Zibepo was also a chief, a giant of a man, and the British preferred him to be the next king because they could control him better. So on his way back, he did not know about the British complot to overthrow his kingdom, and Cetshwayo walked into a civil war, which he lost, and then he went in hiding. And because Zibepo couldn't kill him, he couldn't become king, Cetshwayo still was king, and a year later, that same year, Cetshwayo died of a heart attack. Some people suspect poison, but the doctors eventually said it's possible a heart attack. Dinizulu then was 16 years old, and the Boers came with Dinizulu. They defeated Zibepo's forces, and the Boers again, they reinstated Dinizulu, the heir to the throne, as the king of the Zulus. So listen carefully now. What happened? The Boers saved the bloodline of the kings of Zululand 3 times. First, they instated Mpande, they protected Dinizulu, and then they reinstated Dinizulu. But the British did not recognize the 16-year-old, 15-year-old boy as the next king. Zimbabwe was still alive, and Dinizulu now resisted the British desire to colonize Zululand. So Dinizulu again gets some Boers with him, with his own troops, and they defeated and killed Zimbabwe. The British didn't like that. So they tried him and they sent him for 10 years into exile in St. Helena. After that 10 years, when he came back, Zululand was divided in a lot of sectors or provinces or sectors. And not recognizing Dinizulu as king, but recognize him as a person of influence, they made him chief Induna. They still did not recognize him, but the Boers did recognize him. The British then, that was part of the gold rush was then already on the go in Transvaal, and they wanted more hard labor or cheap labor. So the British enforced a hut tax onto the Zulus, and the army would go and you would be taxed for every hut, and the people were poor and they could not pay the tax. So another guy, and also a chief, a young chief, Mbambata, rebelled, and he started attacking the British. Some of my black friends also told me that Mbambata took some of the British they killed, they cut off the penises, grilled it on the fire and eat it to get the power over the British. The British did not appreciate that. They could not catch Mbambata. He disappeared. But they arrested Dinizulu for treason. It was a long court case. During 1909, he was then jailed for another 4 years. 1910, Dinizulu's lifelong friend, Louis Botha, also the guy who took him out of Ulundi before the attack on Ulundi, and who actually educated him and trained him, became the Prime Minister of the Union of South Africa. And the first thing Botha did when he became the Prime Minister was to release Dinizulu. And he took him to his farm because Dinizulu was sick. At his farm where Dinizulu were, he was then visited by state leaders from all over the world, as well as Mahatma Gandhi also visited Dinizulu before his death. So when Dinizulu died, the Boers took him back to the Zulus. The Zulus went and buried him at the burial place of the kings in Zululand. Dinizulu's son Solomon then became king. But something very impressive happened in 2008. And I'll let you read this article, which is the only article on the subject which was correct and written by a black Zulu. Listen to this.
A statue of Dinizulu Kacetshwayo, the last Zulu king recognized by the British, was erected in Durban, South Africa, next to the statue of General Louis Botha. The statue's unveiling was a long-awaited event, with KwaZulu-Natal Premier Sbu Ndebele announcing it would finally take place on September 20th, 2008, after being under 24-hour security for a year. The statue is seen as a sign of peace between the Zulus and the Boers, and is located at the corner of Berea Road and Warwick Avenue.
All problems in the world go back to the British. That's true in Pakistan, India. That's true in China. That's true throughout the Middle East. That's true here in Cyprus. Because they were the most powerful empire for 200 years. And they left behind conflicts everywhere. You know, the disaster taking place in Palestine right now. One of the reasons is that between 1915 and 1917, the British promised the same territory to 3 different groups. So first, in the McMahon communications, the British promised it to the Arabs. You fight with us against the Turks, it's yours. Then they negotiated the Sykes-Picot Treaty to say to the French, it's yours. Then in the Balfour Declaration in 1917, they said it's a Jewish homeland. So the British promised 3 times land that wasn't even theirs. And they got a lot of nerve as far as I'm concerned. And now you need to disentangle all of this. But this is where the problems originate.